The parking lot is empty on Sunday morning. Not a single car where there used to be 200. Inside the sanctuary, dust particles dance in the colored light, streaming through stained glass windows that cost the congregation $80,000 back in 1987. The piano sits silent. The pulpit stands abandoned, and on the door, a simple handwritten sign, Building for Sale. This isn't happening in some liberal coastal city. This is Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Henderson, North Carolina, Dothan, Alabama. Small towns across Mississippi, Georgia, Tennessee, and South Carolina. Towns where the church wasn't just a building, it was the social infrastructure, the community center, the moral compass, and the absolute center of life itself. Between 2010 and 2020, the Southern Baptist Convention lost more than 2 million members. That's not a typo. 2 million people walked away from the largest Protestant denomination in America, a denomination so deeply woven into Southern identity that people used to joke you couldn't run for office in Alabama without a Southern Baptist membership card. But here's what makes this story truly stunning. It's accelerating. In 2022 alone, the denomination reported losing another 457,371 members. That's 1,253 people every single day, 52 people every hour. And the pastors, they never saw it coming. Reverend Michael Thompson had pastored First Baptist Church of Meridian, Mississippi for 17 years when he first noticed something was wrong. It was 2014, and the Wednesday night prayer meeting, once packed with 75 faithful attendees, had dwindled to 12. I told myself it was just a phase, he later recalled in an interview with Religion News Service. I thought people were busy. I thought it would bounce back. It didn't. By 2019, his Sunday morning congregation had shrunk from 300 to 90. In 2021, the church closed its doors forever. The building is now a furniture warehouse. Thompson's story isn't unique. It's the norm. Across the Bible Belt, churches that stood for over a century are shuttering at a rate not seen since the Black Death emptied medieval European cathedrals. In rural Kentucky alone, 146 churches closed between 2015 and 2020. In North Carolina, the number was 212. These aren't fringe congregations or struggling startups. These are established institutions, churches with endowments, paid-off buildings, and histories that stretch back to before the Civil War. What happened? To understand the collapse, you have to understand what these churches meant. In 1972, sociologist Samuel Hill published a landmark study called Southern Churches in Crisis, where he identified what he called the 3 pillars of Southern religious life: biblical literalism, personal evangelism, and moral conservatism. These weren't just theological positions, they were cultural identities. Being Southern Baptist didn't just mean you believed certain things about God. It meant you were part of a tribe, a community that defined itself against the secular world outside. For generations, this worked. The church was where you met your spouse. It was where your children made friends. It was where business deals were discussed after services. It was where social status was established and maintained. In many Southern towns, the question wasn't whether you went to church, it was which church you attended. The social pressure was immense. To not attend church was to mark yourself as an outsider, as someone not to be trusted. But something shifted in the early 2000s. The first crack appeared with the internet. Suddenly, young people in small Southern towns had access to ideas, perspectives, and communities beyond their geographic boundaries. A teenager in rural Georgia could connect with people in New York, Los Angeles, London, Tokyo. The insularity that had protected Southern church culture for generations evaporated almost overnight. Youth pastors started reporting something strange. Their kids were asking questions they'd never heard before. Questions about evolution. Questions about homosexuality. Questions about whether people of other religions were really going to hell. And the churches, by and large, responded with the same playbook they'd always used: double down on certainty. Here's where this gets really interesting. From 2000 to 2010, you could actually track a growing divide in how Southern Baptist churches responded to cultural change. Some pastors, usually younger ones or those in suburbs near larger cities, tried a softer approach. They emphasized grace, community, and personal relationship with Jesus, while quietly downplaying controversial topics. These churches, researchers found, actually grew modestly during this period. But they were the minority. Most churches did the opposite. They got louder about political issues. They became increasingly aligned with Republican Party politics. Sermons that once focused on personal salvation and biblical stories started sounding more like Fox News commentary. One study by researchers at Duke University found that between 2004 and 2016, the average Southern Baptist sermon spent $62% more time on political topics than on traditional theological themes like grace, redemption, or the life of Christ. And here's the thing nobody expected. This strategy worked at first. Churches that went all in on culture war politics actually saw membership increases between 2004 and 2012. Pastors looked at their growing parking lots and thought they'd found the answer. They doubled down even harder. Then 2016 happened. The presidential election of 2016 was a watershed moment for Southern churches, but not in the way most people think. It wasn't the election itself, it was what came after. 81% of white evangelical Christians voted for Donald Trump, a candidate whose personal life violated virtually every moral standard these churches had preached for decades. Multiple marriages, affairs with adult film stars, bragging about sexual assault on tape, none of it mattered. And the younger generation watched. Now, here at Professor Archive, we're going to take a quick moment here. If you're finding this deep dive into American religious history valuable, consider hitting that super thanks button below. It helps us continue making these in-depth documentaries about the stories that shaped our world. All right, back to our story, because what happened next is absolutely crucial. Where are you watching this from right now, and what time is it where you are? Drop a comment. I'm genuinely curious how far this story has traveled. Are you in the Bible Belt yourself? Have you watched this transformation firsthand? Sarah Collins was 23 in 2016. She'd grown up in Spartanburg, South Carolina, attending First Baptist Church 3 times a week her entire life. Youth group on Wednesday, choir practice on Thursday, and 2 services on Sunday. She'd been baptized at 12, gone on mission trips to Honduras and Haiti, and had every intention of raising her own children in the church. It was my whole life, she told researchers from the Pew Research Center in 2019. My identity was wrapped up in being a Christian, being part of that community. Then came the Trump endorsement. Not just from politicians, but from her pastor, from the pulpit. The same pulpit where she'd been taught that character matters, that sexual purity is sacred, that lying is a sin. I watched my pastor explain away everything he told us was wrong, Collins said. And I realized if all of that was negotiable, what else was? Collins left the church in 2017. She hasn't been back, and she's not alone. Data from the Public Religion Research Institute shows that between 2016 and 2020, white evangelical churches lost 26% of their members between the ages of 18 and 35. That's more than 1 in 4 young people, the exact demographic churches need to survive long term. But it gets worse. Those young people who left, they didn't just switch churches, they stopped identifying as Christian altogether. The number of religiously unaffiliated adults in the South doubled from 11% in 2007 to 22% in 2021. In states like North Carolina and Virginia, the number hit 28%. The Bible Belt was developing cracks. Pastors started to panic. Some tried to course correct, softening their political rhetoric and refocusing on community and service. But they discovered something terrifying. It was too late. The people who'd left weren't coming back, and the people who'd stayed were angry about any change at all. Churches found themselves trapped between a shrinking base of older, politically conservative members who demanded more of the same, and a missing generation of young people who wanted nothing to do with them. The financial collapse followed predictably. Churches are expensive to maintain, The average mid-sized Southern Baptist church has annual operating costs of around $250,000. That covers the pastor's salary, building maintenance, insurance, utilities, and programming. When a church loses 30% dollars of its members, it doesn't just lose 30% dollars of its revenue. It loses its most active volunteers, its musicians, its Sunday school teachers, its committee members. The church enters a death spiral. Reverend James Patterson watched it happen at Mount Zion Baptist Church in rural Tennessee. Built in 1889, the church had survived the Spanish flu, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and the Civil Rights era. It couldn't survive the 2010s. We went from 200 members to 60 in 5 years, Patterson told the Baptist Press in 2020. We cut the music program, then we cut the youth pastor. Then we went to 1 service instead of 2. We sold the church van, we stopped fixing things that broke, and still we couldn't make the budget. Mount Zion closed in 2021. The congregation, what was left of it, merged with another struggling church 15 miles away. Here's a number that should shock you. In 1990, there were approximately 47,000 Southern Baptist churches in America. In 2022, there were 38,000. That's 9,000 churches gone. But those numbers don't tell the whole story because the churches that remain are much smaller. The average Southern Baptist congregation in 1990 had 175 members. In 2022, it was 76. More than half the remaining churches run fewer than 50 people on a typical Sunday. And it's accelerating. Demographers project that at current rates, by 2040, the Southern Baptist Convention will have fewer than 8 million members, down from a peak of 16 million in 2006. That's a collapse of 50% in just 34 years. But here's what makes this story even more fascinating. It's not affecting all churches equally. Mega churches, those massive congregations with thousands of members and rock concert sound systems, are actually doing fine. Some are even growing. It's the small and mid-sized churches, the backbone of Southern religious life, that are imploding. The intimate congregations where everybody knew everybody, where the pastor knew your family history, where you had church dinners and mission trips and genuine community, those are dying. What's replacing them? In many cases, nothing. Researchers tracking religious affiliation in former Bible Belt strongholds are finding entire counties where church attendance has dropped below 20%. These are places where 30 years ago it was closer to 70%. The social infrastructure is simply gone, and the effects ripple out in unexpected ways. Churches in the South didn't just provide spiritual services. They ran food banks, addiction recovery programs, youth sports leagues, and senior citizen centers. They provided disaster relief, operated free health clinics, and offered financial counseling. When First Baptist Church of Jasper, Alabama closed in 2019, the town lost its only food bank. When Calvary Baptist in Greenville, South Carolina shuttered in 2020, 200 low-income families lost access to free after-school care. The crack-up isn't just religious, it's social, economic, and cultural. Some pastors are trying radical experiments to survive. In Mississippi, 5 dying churches pooled their resources to create one shared congregation, rotating services between the 5 buildings and sharing a single pastor. It's working, barely. They have 150 combined members where they used to have 420, but at least the doors stay open. Others are getting creative with their buildings. A church in Arkansas converted half its sanctuary into a coffee shop that's open 6 days a week. A congregation in Louisiana turned their fellowship hall into a gym and started charging membership fees. The income keeps the church afloat, but critics ask whether a church that spends more time and energy on lattes and spin classes than on worship is really still a church. The real question, the one that keeps denominational leaders up at night, is whether this collapse can be stopped or if it's inevitable. Some scholars argue that what we're witnessing is simply a return to normal. The mid-20th century, they point out, was an aberration in American religious history. Church attendance spiked during the Cold War as America defined itself against godless communism. It was never sustainable. We're just reverting to historical norms. Others believe the collapse is specific to this particular form of Christianity, the politically conservative, culturally rigid literalist tradition that dominated the South. They point to growing churches in urban areas that emphasize social justice, inclusion, and progressive theology as evidence that Christianity itself isn't dying, just this version of it. But here's what nobody disputes. The Bible Belt as it existed for the last 150 years is over. Done. Finished. The cultural dominance of conservative Protestant Christianity in the South has ended. Whether that's good or bad depends on your perspective, but it's undeniable. Pastor Michael Thompson, the one we met at the beginning whose church became a furniture warehouse, now works as a hospital chaplain. He doesn't regret his years in ministry, but he's not optimistic about the future of Southern churches. "We built our whole identity around being separate from the world," he said in 2022. "We preached about being salt and light, but what we really meant was being isolated and superior. And when the world changed, we couldn't change with it. We chose our political tribe over our faith tradition, and we lost everything." Not every pastor agrees with that harsh assessment. Some argue the collapse is actually a purification, burning away the casual Christians and leaving only the truly committed. The churches that survive, they say, will be stronger, more authentic, more focused on genuine faith rather than social obligation. Maybe, but the numbers suggest otherwise. Each year, the average age of Southern Baptist church members creeps upward. It's now 58 years old. In another generation, many of these congregations will simply die of old age. Their buildings will be sold, converted to breweries and antique shops and escape rooms. The potluck dinners and vacation Bible schools and Christmas pageants will become memories. And perhaps that's the most striking thing about this entire story: how quiet the collapse has been. There were no dramatic confrontations, no theological councils, no great schisms. Churches just slowly, steadily emptied out. Families stopped attending. Young people stopped coming back from college. And one day, the cost of keeping the lights on exceeded the offerings in the plate, and the doors closed for the last time. The Bible Belt crack-up wasn't a sudden earthquake. It was erosion, steady and relentless, wearing away foundations until structures that seemed eternal simply crumbled. And now, across the South, those empty church buildings stand as monuments to a world that no longer exists. Drive through any small Southern town and you'll see them. Beautiful old structures, architectural gems from another era, with "for sale" signs out front and weeds growing through the parking lot cracks. Inside, hymnals still sit in the pews. Sunday school rooms still have children's artwork on the walls. Baptismal pools still hold water, though no one's entered them in years. The question now is what comes next? What happens to communities when the institution that defined them for generations disappears? What fills the gap? So far, the answer seems to be nothing. Or rather, a fragmented landscape of online communities, secular social groups, and private spirituality that lacks the cohesive power of what came before. Some see this as liberation, the end of social coercion and moral policing. Others see it as cultural catastrophe, the loss of shared values and community bonds. But whatever your perspective, one thing is certain: the South has changed in fundamental ways that can't be reversed. The grandchildren of Southern Baptist deacons are now spiritual but not religious, or agnostic, or simply indifferent to the questions that consumed their ancestors. The Bible Belt didn't just crack. In many places, it shattered completely, and the pieces can't be put back together. Not because people lack faith or commitment, but because the world that sustained that particular form of religious life no longer exists. The insularity is gone. The social pressure has evaporated. The certainty has been replaced by pluralism and doubt. What we're witnessing is the end of an era in American religious history. And like all endings, it's both sad and inevitable, tragic and necessary, a loss and a liberation all at once. If you've made it this far, you're part of the Professor Archive community, and we're grateful to have you here. This channel exists to tell the complex, often uncomfortable stories that shaped our world. If you appreciate what we do, that super thanks button is a great way to support more content like this. Every bit helps us keep digging into history's most fascinating moments. The empty churches of the South will stand for a while longer, slowly deteriorating, waiting for buyers or bulldozers. Some will find new lives as community centers or concert venues. Others will simply collapse under their own weight. But they'll all remain as evidence of a transformation few saw coming. A crack-up that happened slowly, then all at once, changing the American South forever. And somewhere, in a furniture warehouse in Meridian, Mississippi, if you look closely, you can still see the outline on the wall where the cross used to hang.